For the past several weeks, I've been trying to get together a study of David and then try to present that with y'all now that we've finished the life of King Saul the Tall. What I'm going to do throughout the first few minutes of tonight's sermon is share with you the setup of what I had intended to do in order to springboard from the life of into the life of David. But as I was continuing to study the peculiar names that are in First Chronicles chapter 1, I came through a gem that's going to make us steer course in our trek through the Bible. So I'll just say that right now as we go into First Chronicles chapter 1. The first 4 verses, we'll read those. First Chronicles 1:1, Adam, Seth, Enosh, Canaan, Mahalaleel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah, and his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Just in these 4 verses alone, we read a record of 1,560 years of human history. And then verse 5, we begin to read the sons of Japheth. Verses 5 through 7 share with us the origins of the Germanic, Scandinavian, and Slavic peoples, the Medes, the people settling in modern-day Georgia and Azerbaijan, the Cappadocians, the Paphlagonians, the Phrygians, the Ionian and Aeolian Greeks, the Trojans, the Cypriots, the Thracians, the Celts that settled in modern-day Spain and France, and the Britons. Those are what we read in 1 Chronicles 1, verses 5 through 7. Verses 8 through 16, we see the descendants of Ham. These include the peoples of all Africa, including the Egyptians, the Libyans, the Philistines, the Minoans, the Phoenicians, the Hittites, the Canaanites, the Akkadians, the Arabs that live from Kuwait to Oman, the Far East Asians, and the Native Americans. All within those verses. Verses 17 to 23 share with us the peoples that came from Shem. These include the Persians, the Syrians and Assyrians, the Hurrians, the Lydians, the Armenians, the Bactrians, the Indians, the Aborigines, and the Pacific Islanders. The Australian Aborigines. Yes, sir. You said for an American Indian? Well, some could have been, because they would have gone from Asia and then all the way down to the Pacific Islands and then go from the southern tip of Southern America on down or on up. So yeah, some Aborigines could have transferred over to South America. But then let's take a look at verses 24 to 28. We see here Shem, Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, Peleg, Reu, Serug, Nahor, Terah, and Abram, who is Abraham. The sons of Abraham were Isaac and Ishmael. So these 4 verses cover a span of 423 years of human history. It's interesting considering that Shem to Isaac is 11 generations. Adam to Shem is 11 generations. So it's interesting to see that the lifespan of 11 generations goes from about 1,500 years to just shy of 500 years. But then we take a look at more families that came from the line of Abraham. Verse 29. These are the genealogies. The firstborn of Ishmael was, and then the next three verses go through the family of Ishmael. These are the people that settled in northern Saudi Arabia. But then we read verse 32. Now the sons born to Keturah, Abraham's concubine, were Zimran, Joktan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Now, the sons of Jokshan were Sheba and Dedan. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abida, and Eldaah. All these were the children of Keturah. I want to point out Shua, the youngest son of Abraham and Keturah. He will be important in our study later today. And also Sheba. We'll be coming back to him later on tonight. But here we see all these peoples inhabited Saudi Arabia along the Red Sea, all the way down to the modern country of Yemen. These are who these people are. So then we go to verse 34. We read, and Abraham begot Isaac. The sons of Isaac were Esau and Israel. And from these two boys, we get the nations of Israel and Edom. Now, usually Christians will just stop right there and consider, well, the rest of chapter 1 is just talking about the family of Esau. He's not really of the line of the people who are blessed by God, so let's just skip over him. I beg to differ, my beloved brethren. Let's fast forward a little bit to verse 43. Verse 43 shows us some very important information. It's a record of the kings of Edom. So this is after the life of Esau. So verse 43 says, now these are the kings who reigned in the land of Edom before a king reigned over the children of Israel. Bela, the son of Beor, and the name of his city was Dinhabah. And when Bela died, Jobab, the son of Zerah of Bozrah, reigned in his place. When Jobab died, Hushan of the land of the Temanites reigned in his place. Now we see here the people in verse 45, the Temanites. We're going to read about a Temanite later on tonight. But I also want us to take a look at a name that we read in verse 44. And when Bela died, Jobab, the son of Zerah of Bozrah, reigned in his place. The Septuagint adds a note, and it basically says, by the way, this is Job. So, without further ado, let's turn to the book of Job and take a look at the sufferings of Job. Now, I kind of wanted to stay with what we were doing in First Chronicles, because that really sets up, okay, who is Job? Where did he come from? Do we know anything about his friends? And the background really does help us with what's going on here in the life of Job, because when we look at Job, we don't really see who the author is. We have an idea that this may be the oldest book in the Bible because of what family life was like here in the book of Job. Much like Abraham and Isaac and everyone who came after them, they gathered wealth, and it was not measured in money, what they had monetarily. It was measured in animals. We see this in the life of Abraham, and we also see this in Job. Is that a raised hand? They used that as a form of bartering, but their personal wealth was based on the animals that they had. We'll take a look at it right here. We have Job has his introduction all the way in verse number 1. So in verse 1, we read, "There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and shunned evil. And 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him." So we see here that Job is from the land of Uz. Scholars see that Uz is the same as Edom. Before Esau and all his people moved into the land, the people of Uz were also in the land. So Job was most likely an Edomite. We also see this in 1 Chronicles 1. Mm-hmm. The original wording that the story is in Hebrew. Yeah. Yes. And the story of Job is interesting because we notice that Job had a very long lifespan. At the very end of the book, I'll just spoil the ending for you guys. He lives an additional 140 years, which is great for anyone living in ancient times. And Job, the way that he offers sacrifices, as we'll see soon, he is personally offering sin offerings to the Lord, much like how it happened between Abraham all the way to Moses. So Job has a personal relationship with God without the Mosaic law. And it is very likely that Job was so old that he was in Edom. All he had to do was travel across the border to Midian to a young shepherd named Moses. And it was very likely that Moses heard the story of Job from Job himself. Yes, sir. So it could be that Genesis and Job are the same age, even though the story of Job may have taken place in between Genesis and Exodus. But when we take a look at the life of Job, we see here that he is a blameless and upright man. He still worshiped Yahweh. Oh, I already said that. Okay, verse 3. Also, his possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. I like that phrase. Yeah, he was one of the greatest of all the people in the East. As my dad would say, he's a fat cat. He would have rubbed shoulders with Dale Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan. That's the type of status that this man had. Let me read verses 4 and 5 here. And his sons would go and feast in their houses, each on his appointed day, and would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So it's kind of cool. He had 7 sons, and every night for dinner, each of the sons would host a dinner, and they would invite their sisters to their house. Amen? So it was, when the days of feasting had run their course, that Job would send and sanctify them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did regularly. Job personally presented offerings to God. So this was a clue, as I said before, that the story takes place before the Mosaic law. And we see here from these two verses that he shows deep concern for the spiritual well-being of his children. We may have personal responsibility for what we do at Sunday morning services, Sunday school, daily devotions. But do we pray for our kids? Do we ask God to bless them in a similar way that Job asked for blessings for his kids? Verse 6, Satan then comes into the scene. Now, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before Yahweh, and Satan was also among them. And Yahweh said to Satan, "From where do you come?" So Satan answered Yahweh and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it." Then Yahweh said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?" So from these three verses, the setting is angels gathering to report to God, including Satan himself. He is God's enemy, even though everything he does comes from the permission of God. So Satan is going out and about. He's trying to get everyone down to his level. So as he's going to and fro on the earth, as verse 7 says, he sees Job, how Job is the most righteous man in his area. Yes. I don't know if you could tell with the little dragon. Yes, that's Satan. So the Lord is saying, I know that you see Job and you want to tempt him because he is dear to me. And anyone who is dear to me, you want them to fall to your level. I see what you're up to, Satan. Satan is our enemy because he actively looks for people to attack with temptation and because he wants people to hate God too. This should encourage us because anyone committed to God should expect attacks from Satan. If you're not being attacked, something's wrong. Verse number 9. So Satan answered Yahweh and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has in every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." So a couple of lessons that we can learn from Satan here. One, he is accountable to God. He is literally being summoned by Yahweh to give an account of all he's doing on the earth. God knew that Satan was intent in attacking Job. Number two, Satan is not omnipresent. From these verses, we see that Satan had to go to and fro along the earth. He couldn't be at your house, and then at this person's house, and then my house, all at the same time. Number three, Satan cannot see into your minds or foretell the future. If he had, he wouldn't have made this challenge to God. because why fight a losing battle? Number 4, because Satan cannot do anything without God's permission, God's people can overcome Satan's attacks through God's power. And that's exactly what the Lord was counting on. He knew that Satan wanted to tempt Job, to bring him down to an unbelievable state. And yet God knew that with his help, if Job was calling on the Lord, that he would get Job through that temptation. And the same thing can happen for us. When we see ourselves in a rut, in a very dark place, do we have the peace of knowing that when we call upon the Lord, we shall be saved? Lastly, God puts limits on what Satan can do. Verse 12 says, "And the Lord said to Satan, Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person." So Satan went out from the presence of Yahweh. Although God loves us, we are exposed to trials and tests to express our faith to the world. There is a reason for our suffering, my friends. We also see that God is aware of every attempt by Satan to bring suffering into our lives. So when we see sorrow, anger, death in our lives, God is not surprised. He knows everything that Satan throws at us, and he still loves us. Verse 13. Within these next few verses, there's a barrage of loss in Job's life. Verse 13 says, "Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their house. And a messenger came to Job and said, The oxen are plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them. When the Sabaeans," see, Sabaeans, they're back again. These were people who were in modern-day Yemen. "When the Sabaeans raided them and took them away, indeed, they have killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels and took them away, yes, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another also came and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house." And suddenly a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead. And I alone have escaped to tell you. From verses 13 to 19, the Sabaeans steal his livestock. A storm kills all his sheep and the servants that were attending them. The Hurrians steal his camels, and a great wind kill all his children. Job receives all these reports within a minute. Job goes from owning about $51 million in assets, with people to give them to after he's dead, to now being in the poorhouse with absolutely no children. How does he respond to all this? Verse 20 shows that he responded how we would respond. Verse 20 reads, "Then Job arose, tore his robe, and shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshipped." So Job did not have to hide his grief, my friends. He expressed his loss in a healthy way. He reacted rightly toward God by acknowledging his authority over everything. See, just like us, when we experience the loss of everything, I mean, imagine if you owned $51 million and then within a minute, you're going to the poorhouse. But all your kids have also been killed. You would probably also rip your robes, shave your head, and fall to the ground, weeping because of your loss. But would you say the words in verse 21? "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." So Job was right in actually mourning for this deep loss. It's okay to mourn a loss. And there is that healthy balance that Job shared in being human and expressing his emotions of all this death and this calamity, while also seeing that God is the sovereign of our lives. Job 1 is proof that people can love God for who he is, not just for what he gives. The Lord has blessed Job with all these animals and 10 kids. I mean, you try convincing your kids and grandkids to have 10 kids nowadays. But, Job had them. And all of a sudden, he didn't. And in that great sadness, he says, "Hey, the Lord was the one that gave me everything. And it was the Lord who also took it from me. Blessed be his name." And the very last verse is sweet in this story, that it says, "In all this, Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong." This was his first test. And so far, Job has passed. Unfortunately, we read Job chapter 2. Job may be thinking, well, I lost all my donkeys. I lost my oxen, his camels, his sheep, his servants, well, except the 4, right? He lost all his kids. But at least he has his health. And at least he has his wife. Let's read chapter 2. Verse 1 says, "Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before Yahweh. And Satan came also among them to present himself before Yahweh. And Yahweh said to Satan, 'From where do you come?' Satan answered Yahweh and said, 'From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it.' Then Yahweh said to Satan, 'Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil? And still he holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without a cause.' So Satan answered Yahweh and said, 'Skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face.'" Ooh. These verses are very similar to what we read in chapter 1. Satan believes that Job is willing to accept his losses as long as his own skin is safe. That's what Satan means by skin for skin. Satan's next step was to inflict physical suffering to prove his point. Satan even has the audacity of tempting God to lay his hand upon Job. But here's the thing. Satan cannot persuade God to go against his own character. Job's suffering was a test for Job and his friends, not God. God cannot be tempted. Yes, sir. Cannot be tempted or tested. We see that Satan was willing to do the deed himself. So God, being a just God, was willing to allow Satan to have his hand upon Job. But showing that the Lord has power over Satan, he still gave a limit to the amount of punishment that Satan was to dish out. Verse 6 says, "And the Lord said to Satan, Behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life." So you can put your hand on him. You can have physical ailments go on Job. Just don't kill him. There is a religion out there called Satanism. You may have heard of that religion out there. Satanism has the precept that Satan is your friend. God is your enemy. And God is so much your enemy that he is willing to contend with Satan and that they are equals in power. Obviously, those people have not read Job because God overpowers Satan. Yes, sir. We'll talk about that when we go over the exile. But we have an instance where God is summoning Satan to give an account of everything that he's doing. And when Satan is asking permission to tempt others, God has power over Satan to tell him how far he's willing to go. We serve an all-powerful God. He is not having an arm wrestling match with Satan and is in a stalemate with him. When Satan arm wrestles with God, 100 times out of 100, God wins. So Satan leaves the presence of the Lord in verse 6. Verse 7, we read, "So Satan went out from the presence of Yahweh and struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took for himself a potsherd with which to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of the ashes." So here, yes, Satan inflicts this very painful boils that are on Job's body, and that it takes pieces of broken pottery for Job to try to scratch those boils in order to get some measure of relief. And they're everywhere, from the sole of his feet to the very top of his head. So now he doesn't have his health. But hey, at least he has his wife. But then we read verse 9. Then his wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." Well, so much for that. Mrs. Job's presence caused even more suffering with her remarks. Many think that believing in God protects them from trouble. But when tragedy comes, they question God's goodness and justice. And that's exactly what Mrs. Job does here. Are we like Mrs. Job? Or do our prayers to God sound like what Job says in verse 10? He says, "You speak as one of the foolish women speaks." Remember, the fool has said in his heart, "There is no God." Shall we indeed accept good from God? And shall we not accept adversity? What a question. Job here shares the perspective that God works through good. God works good through the bad. We are very willing to accept the gifts and the blessings that God has for us. And yet sometimes we may be like, well, there's trials and tribulations and persecutions, maybe even death if a missionary is going to the mission field. But I don't want that for my life. I want the blessings. I don't want the nasty looking stuff over here. That is not Christianity, my friends, because that is not what Job preaches here. How can we accept the blessings of God without the adversity? We, as followers of Yahweh, need to expect adversity, because if we don't have adversity, then we are following Satan. And we see that in the last part of the verse. In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. So now he's lost all his possessions. He's lost all his kids. And because he lost all his possessions, he didn't have enough money to pay off the 4 servants that were still alive. So he probably had to let them go. He lost his health, and he has a henpecking wife. So then word goes out all throughout Edom, and we read a couple of friends coming to visit him while he's down. Verse 11. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all his adversity that had come upon him, each one came from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite. We read this in 1 Chronicles 1. Temanites are descendants of Esau. So, again, another clue that Job may have been an Edomite. Now get this. Bildad the Shuhite. Shua was one of the sons of Abraham and Keturah. So that's who this person was. And Zophar the Naamathite. For they had made an appointment together to come and mourn with him and to comfort him. Okay, so far so good. Job at least has 3 friends that are willing to go find him and comfort him. But when they find him, they don't even know that Job is Job. That's how badly he looks. Verse 12. And when they raised their eyes from afar and did not recognize him, they lifted their voices and wept. And each one tore his robe and sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his grief was very great. We in the West may think, dude, you're going to mourn with a friend who's literally lost everything, except the nagging wife, and all you're going to do is sit there next to him for 7 days? I mean, say something to him, man. According to Jewish hospitality, if you're in mourning and you have a mourner coming to comfort you, they don't say anything to you unless you say the first word. This is going to show you that Job was very saddened with the affairs that was going on in his life. which goes to show us also a lesson from these verses. Often, the best response to another person's suffering is silence. We may think, well, I want to go and I want to hug on this person. And those of y'all who did that to me when my father passed away several months ago, I was grateful for it. And my mom and my brother Omar, they were the ones who wanted to hug on people and talk to them about, the grief that they were going through. I was a lot like Job. I wanted to just go to my office behind the church and just continue my Bible study. I wanted to continue working. I didn't want to think about my dad because every time I thought about my dad, I thought of the good things. And when I thought about the good things, I remembered I can no longer have experiences with him anymore because now he's gone to be with the Lord. And because of that, that made me sad. And I didn't want to be sad because, I'm supposed to be a man. I'm supposed to, go forward. Let the dead bury their dead. No, I'm just kidding. But I needed that time of silence too. People mourn in different ways. And yes, there were several of you that called, that were able to give me hugs. And I coveted those, still do. But there is that time where people need to mourn in silence. Are you willing to wait? Be ready for them to open their hearts and arms to you. The worst thing that you could tell a mourning person is, I feel your pain. I understand what you're going through. No, you don't. Telling that to me a couple months ago, I had lost my dad, yes, but then several months before, I had lost Pastor Ashley, the man who I would have gone to for comfort now that my father had passed. So now that I had lost both my father figures, I was really glad that no one told me, I feel your pain. So when Job is suffering, he sees that his friends are coming, and they are wise, as far as earthly wisdom goes. They are waiting for Job to accept them. And just as how they were doing that, this is a picture of Christ. We are suffering in our sin. And Jesus comes and he sees us from far away and he laments. And he comes to us and he waits for the door to open. So I ask you, my friends, those of you watching by video, do you have Christ already in your heart? And if not, Christ is waiting at the door for you. So if you're willing, he is able to give you that embrace. He is able to cleanse you of your filth that is called sin. Because whether you know it or not, Satan is attacking you. But Jesus is willing to open his arms to you so that you could then be comforted under his wings. Chapters 1 and 2 show the suffering of Job. And within the next several chapters, we see that there's a battle of the minds taking place. His friends, they try to comfort him. Comfort, quotations. If you don't know the story, we'll talk about it throughout the next couple of weeks. But we're going to see how Job, even though he gets these speeches from his friends, and they try to help and comfort him, their words really do say otherwise. But Job is willing to bet on the Lord to get him through this tragedy. And maybe you're going through a tragedy right now. And if not, a tragedy is coming. So as we go through the book of Job throughout the next month or two, I thought it appropriate that we deviate from going from Saul to David and that we take a look at Job. Because the message that we have from Job may be what a person other than myself needs to study. So if we're ready for the book of Job, and if you want to read ahead, go ahead and read the next several chapters or so, and then we'll have a continued discussion on Job next week. Class dismissed.